Now, the federal government is under pressure to address safety in early childhood education centres after a Victorian childcare worker was charged with more than 70 offences. The government has promised to nationalise working with children checks by the end of the year and is open to considering an independent childcare commission.
Clare O'Neil, Minister for Housing and Homelessness and Cities, joins us in the studio now. Good morning to you, Minister. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, guys. Thanks for having me on the show.
Just like you, James and I, any parent around Australia, you would have been horrified and just devastated to hear what has happened in Melbourne.
Yeah, absolutely, Bridget. I mean, we experience these things not just as journalists and decision makers, but as parents and members of the community. I've got a 3-year-old daughter. So these things really hit home for me, and I know the two of you also have young children. You know, every Australian's affected at a moment like this, but when you've got a child in your household and you feel that visceral sense of their innocence and your responsibility to protect them, the idea that you could be dropping them at a childcare centre every day and they're not safe, it is just so awful.
That list was hard to go through, actually, the list when it was published of all the different centres.
Yeah, actually, I was, when this news broke, I was late for a meeting and I just glimpsed the headlines before I went in, and I just went into an absolute panic just checking this list just to see if any of my kids had been at those centres, and I know every parent in Victoria was doing the same thing. So, yeah, it's a really a terrible situation, and, you know, something that's got to galvanise some change across this system, which is obviously, you know, very much needed.
I just did wonder about that. I mean, we heard from the Parenthood yesterday on our show. We've had a whole range of people reacting to this. There have been repeated calls to this idea of an independent childcare commission. Is that something you're personally, I know it's outside your portfolio, something you personally think might be a good idea?
Look, I think the governments across the country are going to be open to looking at how we can do things differently, because, you know, for those who are watching at home, this horrible incident in Victoria isn't the only recent instance of this we've seen. We've had an instance in New South Wales last year and one in Queensland not long ago. I think it's pretty clear that the protections that we've tried to put in place in childcare are not working properly, and it is time to look at other things. So you've heard Minister Jason Clare, who also has young children of his own. He's a passionate advocate against child sexual abuse. He's looking at a whole range of options now. We've got some legislation already in the Parliament and some other processes that are already in train, but we do need to have a proper look at this.
Do we go back to the recommendations, say, from the Royal Commission into Institutional Child Sexual Abuse, which was so groundbreaking? I mean, why are these recommendations left on the shelf for so long?
I don't have a good answer for you, Bridget, and I think the last thing we need right now is, you know, politicians parroting political lines about things. I'm not sure is the honest answer. One of the things about working with children checks that is really important here, this is the standard process that every childcare worker goes through before they can get employed in a centre. I think everyone would agree we need to have a good look at that process. But I'd also say that's not a silver bullet, and there probably isn't one here. For what we see in a lot of these instances, you know, a lot of these predators would pass a working with children check. They don't have anything in a history that indicates a problem. So I think there's some things here about the culture of what goes on in these centres and how do we see the first instances of something that might be going wrong and create systems where people can quickly report up and get action.
You're the Housing Minister.
Yes.
House prices rose 0.6% in June. A lot of the industries that spruik real estate are talking about new heights for the markets. There's a new first home buyers scheme coming in at the start of next year. Is the growth in the housing market at the moment sustainable?
Well, we're seeing lots of different numbers across the country, James, and if I could just come back from the very specific question you've asked, I'm really concerned about housing affordability. What house prices are doing around the country is not always a perfect reflection of that, because what we're really concerned about as a government is making sure we've got proper stock of affordable homes at the end of the market where we're seeing lower income people or first home buyers come in, and that's a lot of the work that the government's undertaking at the moment. So actually today we've just announced that the second round of the Housing Australia Future Fund has just signed contracts for 5,000 new social and affordable homes that will be built, funded by government around the country. This is the kind of work that we're doing to make sure that Australians have better housing options.
So that's the half. I just wonder about, you've got a productivity summit coming up.
Yeah.
Housing is going to be a part of that. At the moment, if you have an investment property, you hold it from a year, you get a capital gains discount, which is partly why so many Australians chuck their spare cash into property. Does that need to change? Do we need to be looking at bigger issues now? Now you've got this big majority, bigger changes to the tax system to make it easier for people to get into the housing market.
Yeah, so the Productivity Roundtable is going to be a really important moment for our housing conversation, and I certainly see that as a big opportunity for us to start to address some of the really long-running issues in housing. You've talked about tax, and that's actually not the biggest issue that we face in the country with housing. We have a housing crisis in our country because we have a housing shortage. For 40 years, we've not been building enough homes, and that's come home to roost now with, you know, millions of people around the country in some form of housing distress. So the Productivity Commission told us earlier this year that there's 3 reasons why why we're not building the homes we need. There's too much red tape and regulation. It's just too hard to build a house in this country because we're not innovating enough and because we don't have the workforce we need. So the roundtable in August is going to be a really important opportunity for me and other people in this sector to come forward and say we need to make some big decisions about how we are going to shift those dynamics so we can get better housing outcomes for Australians.
The Europe Justice Commission has done a big section on housing as part of its truth-telling inquiry. I'm just wondering whether you'll look at that because some of the statistics in it are so sobering. 12,000 Aboriginal people, families here in Victoria accessing homelessness services.
Yeah.
So many Aboriginal people in houses that just don't meet minimum standards, homelessness rising. What's going on and what tangible things can you do to improve this?
So First Nations housing is like many issues in the country. You know, we've got a national problem with housing, but when we look at First Nations communities, all of the things that we're concerned about, homelessness, overcrowding, low home ownership rates, they are all much worse amongst First Nations Australians. So this is a really important priority of the government. What are we doing? The first thing is when we're looking at that end of the market where people are sort of falling in and out of homelessness, the most important thing the Commonwealth can do is fund social and affordable housing. We're building 55,000 social and affordable homes around the country, and we're making sure that that fund is actually building specific housing for First Nations Australians. So there's a lot more work to be done, and we are doing a lot of other things, but I'm assuming you don't want me to go through the litany of programs. I just say to Australians watching at home, this is a really important problem for the country and something the government is addressing.
Just very briefly, you've spoken about boosting supply, big thing. Do we also need to reduce demand on the system, get rid of first home buyer schemes, get rid of tax breaks for investors, things like that, to try to make it a bit easier for people to enter the housing market? So,
James, we need to build more homes more quickly, and that's the bottom line. So that's the most urgent priority that we need to be focused on, and any expert is going to tell you that that's really where the big benefits are going to come for Australians. There's lots of things that we need to do. So the government is also doing quite a lot to help first homeowners get into the market. If you're at home and you're thinking about buying a home, there are Commonwealth grants and supports available to you to get into housing, and we want to help people do that. I know that there's this big sort of debate amongst the experts about whether these programs are worthwhile. I have an unashamed view that we should live in a country where ordinary Australians, young or old, have a proper opportunity to get into home ownership if that's what they want to do. So we're not going to get rid of those programs. We're going to do 2 big things: build more homes for Australians and make sure that first homeowners get the chance to buy them.
All right, Clare O'Neil, thanks for your time on the program this morning.